Welcome to Script to Screen's Talks podcast. Script to Screen is a charitable organisation dedicated to developing the craft and culture of storytelling for the screen in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Part of our annual programme, the Talks series, brings the creative community together to hear inspirational speakers delve into their creative process, craft, philosophy, or the broader creative landscape. Script to Screen has partnered with the New Zealand International Film Festival to bring you a special series of talks with the filmmakers at the 2017 festival. Helene Wong speaks to legendary New Zealand filmmaker Gaylene Preston about her latest documentary, My Year with Helen. Gaylene shares some entertaining and provocative stories about her experience of making the film while following Helen Clark's attempt to become the Secretary General of the United Nations.
Gaylene, congratulations on just such an amazingly insightful, entertaining film about us, as you've always done, telling us stories about ourselves. But you're quite right. I mean, Gaylene is one of our grand dames of the film industry in New Zealand, and what a film it's almost 40 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's a kind of combination of all of that experience and knowledge that I can see coming out through this film. So I'm sure you've all got lots of questions about it. There are so many layers and so many themes in this film, so I'm not going to ask too many questions, and I'm sure Gaylene is quite capable of talking about this amongst herself. There are, the drill, the microphones, there will be microphones, but Gaylene and I have a short chat beforehand and then we'll open it up. So really, I just really wanted to crack in and ask the question, which is possibly quite obvious, and that is, you were about 6 months into the film of Helen working at the UNDP, and you were suddenly hijacked by this decision of Helen's to run for Secretary General. What was your initial reaction? Did you say, bugger, or did you say, that's fantastic?
The latter.
Good.
Because in that 6 months, we had gone to Botswana on a country visit with Helen. And we'd done that using a film commission scheme that Dave Gibson invented. He's the CEO of the Film Commission currently, and he's also a well-experienced producer, and it's been great to have a well-experienced producer in that role because they know how hard it is, and they understand how it's actually quite different raising the finance to make a feature documentary as opposed to a feature drama. In all feature film financing, you have to have the money. You have to have not some of it, not most of it. You have to have all of it before you can even start. So money raising is a large part of what we do as filmmakers. Very hard to do in documentary. The world is full of people looking for the last 200,000. Everybody, when you go anywhere in the world, when filmmakers gather together, they don't discuss films. They do discuss the F word, funding. Funding is the main thing. So we are very fortunate at the moment in New Zealand to have a funding thing that gives us some money to go away and test the concept, which is what we were doing in Botswana. So we went to Botswana, and as we're doing that, I'm realising that there's this thing coming up called the SG race. And it took me, I am a UN virgin, and I hardly knew what SG meant. And I worked out that we're talking about the Secretary General, and the Secretary General is changing. And there's a bit of hoo-ha around that, and then it becomes all about, will Helen run or not? And up till then, I was having real trouble raising any sort of finance, any sort of real interest in this film, because it's very hard to pitch it to look like anything else than an aid documentary, which isn't cinema. But once Helen decided to run, she took ages to own up, but once she decided to run, we were cooking with gas. So, and that meant that the whole film had an impetus, both with funding, with raising independent finance. Just the whole thing took off, really. And that's when Catherine Madigan, my co-producer, came on board.
Right, right. So it gave it a real boot.
A real boot, yeah. And you can see why. I mean, I think it's very hard to get at that story because the UN is so frustrating. And I think any political, that you could say UN, you can transpose that to any institution, political institution, can't you? I mean, you'd know about that, Helene, more than me.
Yeah, but this is not about me. But what I was thinking, when I first saw the film, it brought to mind really strongly one of your earlier films, which I don't think Esther mentioned, that was Getting to Our Place, which was in 1999, and that was about the making of Te Papa.
Yes.
I don't know whether any of you are familiar with it, but if you can get your hands on it, do, because that is another very riveting documentation of the workings of a public institution making high-stakes decisions about something which was very dear to the country. And you managed to get in there and identify really strong stories with strong drama and narrative in them and tell it in a way that was deeply accessible. And it seemed to me that you were able to probably use your experience on that to apply it to the UN. I mean, you said you were a virgin and that was really probably quite right, but I'm wondering how you went about getting access, because we saw the problems Al Jazeera had.
Yeah.
What do the problems of Gaylene Preston from New Zealand have?
Look, access is the most important thing when making any documentary. And when it came to Getting to Our Place, for example, I was asked to make that film and decided that the best way to make it was over 3 years. So I had Anna Cotterill in there as a field director a lot of the time. I would be looking at rushes, giving feedback, and then when it came to the edit, Paul Sartorius and I, with Anna, sat in there and made sense of it and made that documentary. I think we could make another one. You know, there's enough footage there, because that was also, I saw what we were doing in Te Papa as making an archive, you know, a visual archive of the process. So I've always been interested in the process in institutions. I worked as an art therapist, drama therapist in institutions in the UK in my 20s. And, you know, you work in a 900-bed psychiatric hospital, and the one I worked in was run by a doctor, a very progressive doctor, who wrote a book called Institutional Therapy. He decided that the institution would be the therapy for the 900 people in there. And it's still an incredible book. So I kind of got plugged into an interest in institutions really early.
But it's more than just a visual archive, and I think that's your skill, that you were able to find the drama in it, finding the people who became characters really in their own little dramas, and you were able to do the same with this.
Yeah. Yes, and with this film, we were always looking for characters. So, you know, the style was imposed by all the obstacles, really. So the decisions I made, the creative decisions, were about making a fly-on-the-wall documentary that covered a year, only and interviewing Helen occasionally through that process, and trying to make the interviews as much like a conversation as I could, because she's very well trained in interviews, so we're trying to get past there, and that's her character arc. So there's no I don't take something Helen said in January and use it later in September. You know, she had to have said it again. So I was quite often asking Helen similar things. So she probably thinks I'm really dumb or forgetful, but always those interviews are the spine, and then around that are these characters that emerged. And characters emerge. And the characters in My Year with Helen are people who were prepared to be filmed, really. So as far as, casting goes, you find somebody who, the best thing is if you can find somebody who is the same whether you're filming them, whether you're not filming them. And we were blessed to have a few people like that, really.
Right. And did they make it easier for you to overcome any of the administrative obstacles at all?
No.
No. Okay. So what were some of the administrative obstacles, Gaylene?
The what?
What were some of the administrative obstacles?
Oh, my God. Well, I was there with Catherine. I mean...
Catherine Madigan, producer?
I would, with my little camera, Catherine would do the official obstacle
approach.
Form filling in.
Oh, yeah.
And then when we got a no, sometimes by the time we got the no, I'd already scrambled under or over and got myself in places I wasn't supposed to be. But, I mean, it's very, the UN, wandering around there with a Dana dolly. Does anyone know what a Dana dolly is? Well, it looks very like a pipe bomb. Basically, it's just a way that you can move the camera without having to have an extra person on the crew to actually move it, because your cinematographer can move it, and it just means your shots have got a nice sort of feeling in it. And we were going there with our Dana dolly, and they go, but we've never seen any, nobody else has had one of these, and they haven't needed it, and what are you doing? And we've got to get the canines here, and, I mean...
The canines.
It's serious, they are geared to capture the terrorists. The funny thing is, though, I mean, one night we were basically filming some of those lovely shots around the tapestries, and there was one person on the front of the building. It's kind of weird. So... No, it's an impossible place to film. I wouldn't recommend it. That's why nobody else has done it. But there was a Danish crew in there, and we had a sort of a love-hate relationship with them because they were making a documentary about Liketoft, the leader of the General Assembly, who's in the film occasionally. And they were everywhere we couldn't go because he was the boss of that part of the UN. When we were with Helen over the road at the UNDP, we were fine. But over in that building, we were just in with the press. So it was a pretty easy decision to decide to start filming the press.
Yes. But they were very useful because they were able to explain a lot of the stuff.
Well, that's how we found things out.
Yeah.
Just finding out what's going on and when it's going to happen, and it's really hard. And most of them have difficulty.
So were you with Helen the whole year, or did you go in and out?
We went in and out. So we'd go to wherever, Madrid or wherever Helen was, where it was possible for us to go. I mean, we wanted to go to Moscow with her and it just wasn't possible. There's just niet. Can't be done. So we would go where we could with Helen and come and go from New York. So I think we went to New York how many times? 6 times, probably. The last couple of times the last time I went on my own because we knew the ropes and we were getting short of money, so Catherine stayed home and didn't sleep. So she basically did everything in New Zealand night. I think you couldn't have done it with more people. I think it is just the two of us, with cinematographers coming and going, with soundies coming and going. When we could, we travelled with Ken Saville, our sound person from New Zealand, who just happens to be able to get sound that nobody else we came across could get. So the party that we got into after the debate, that was a rare moment of getting under the wire, and I got there because I went with one of the very large, incredibly handsome Danish cinematographers, and they thought I was with him. So we crashed the party because the Danes are handling the door, you see. They've got those Danes, my goodness. And every now and then we would have lunch on a Sunday with the Danes, and they would complain about how boring all the meetings they were in were. And we would complain about how we couldn't get into any meetings.
So, working with Helen, how did that work out? Did you know her beforehand?
Well, Helen knows thousands of people.
I know.
Yeah.
She would have certainly known of you, but
And
she did not work with her before.
I probably knew her the same way you know her. You know, she knows who you are. She knows who I am.
Yep.
She is very well aware of the work.
Absolutely.
And there'll be respect there, and you can have a nice conversation at the edge of a party, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Helen has a very close group, small group, family and friends that go back a long way. Mm-hmm. And after that, it's the rest of the world. I mean, she's been in the public gaze since she was a whippersnapper.
Mm. Just talk a little bit about the film that didn't get made, which was the film about Helen heading up the UNDP. Do you feel that you've still managed to capture what you'd hoped to capture for that film and got the essence of it and put it into this film?
Yeah. Buy the DVD, though, because we've got some great extras, which do show more of that.
And when is that out?
Hard to say. But in the next 6 months it will.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we've got a cinema release coming, so tell your friends we need it packed out in the first week or it'll be gone. And that's the 31st of August. It will be coming to Auckland. It won't be coming to a cinema near you. It will be coming to the Rialto and a few other selected cinemas. So if you want to see it again, or if you want people you know to see it, that's when to go, the week of the 31st of August.
Absolutely. Just following on from that earlier question about Helen, the dimensions of Helen, I think some of the loveliest sequences there, and possibly the most surprising, are the ones with her family, with Peter and with Dad, her father. I mean, it's wonderful, and you know, the pork and pineapple and all of that was just amazing. And I guess you were hoping that would occupy quite a reasonable segment of the original documentary, which was showing Helen as a woman, as a daughter, as a wife, as a family person, which she's often been criticised in the past for not being. Was
That's
that an
interesting,
intention?
isn't it? You know, women can't win, can they? Which is what the film's about.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that I was making that documentary. You know, in a way that documentary has been made. Claudia Pondeli and Dan Salmon made a 2-part biography documentary of Helen, and I was never trying to do that. My whole interest with Helen was to look at the process of change and how it might work at a global level, and how a woman in at the toppermost of the poppermost. I mean, Helen is still number 22 on the Forbes list as in the top 100 most influential women in the world. You know, we take this for granted, you know, in New Zealand. There's a lot of things we take for granted, and that's one of them. You know, I think, and she turned up recently on another, these are really reputable lists of, she turned up in the 100 most influential people in the world, and she's one of 20 women in it. And she's incredibly well understood in certain circles all around the world. And that rating on the Forbes list isn't because of the UNDP. It's because of, when she came to the UNDP, I think she was number 61. So what I'm saying really is that the film was, when I went away to do the proof of concept, the film was always about the process of how global change might work from behind the shoulder of the most powerful person in the world that I knew and could get access to. And then when we were filming in Botswana and a woman said, "We are punished for being the mothers of the human race," I thought, I want to make a film about that. That is the centre of this movie. I really want to make this film now because I feel like I want to make a film where that could be up on the big screen at the Civic. And that's what I thought. And I could see how you might think, well, that's weird because Helen's not a mother and, it was said by a woman in a meeting, but actually it's key, isn't it? And Helen's the whole thrust of development as Helen was leading it, unfortunately in the past tense now, at the UNDP, the development part of the UN is the huge bit. And empowering women. If you empower women at every level, from the top to the bottom, 51% of the female of the human population is women. The planet's got too many people on it. There's one thing that everybody agrees: human population needs to be slowed down. There's only one way there is even a statistic about that is irrefutably constant, and it is that educated women all over the world in any culture have less children. So let's get the girls in school. As a human thing, we could do that.
Yeah.
And it's emergency. And I mean, if we just did that one thing, a lot of these other conversations would be more solvable. But actually, we're living in an age where the opposite is occurring, sadly.
So, with all of that experience in filming it, you come to another phrase that was used in the film, which was, I think it was the president of the Security Council introducing Helen and introducing her as Mrs. Helen Clark. Do you think the reinvention that Helen was striving at pushing for in her candidacy, are we any closer to it?
Well, he's a Dane. I mean, he comes from one of the very... When you go to the UN, you realise how terribly progressive in some ways we are in New Zealand society and how we are actually leading the world, And we wouldn't call Ms. Clark Mrs. Clark, but that is absolutely routine at the UN. I think the interesting moment with Legetoft is when we're interviewing him and he can't say woman. He says, well, yes, it could be that this job could go to somebody from that part of the human population who isn't quite there yet, the female part.
The female part.
And he still hasn't said woman. And I think to myself, I've had plenty of time now, in a cutting room thinking, why couldn't he say woman? Why couldn't he stand in front of our cameras and say woman? His English is quite fine. And I think he's a politician. He couldn't be seen to say woman for SG because he was actually really busy behind the scenes campaigning for a man to have it. That's just my opinion. Awkward. I could be completely wrong. But why couldn't you just say, to a little friendly Kiwi crew who aren't putting anything up there till at least a year after you've said it, why can't you say woman? What's the problem?
Let's open it up for some questions now. We do have microphones, so if you put your hands up and we'll try and give an even distribution between male and female and begin.
Gaylene, have you got an idea that's coming out?
Would you? Sorry. I don't know whether people at the back can hear, but possibly not.
Have you got an idea in your head that you're going to make another movie of that's going to come out? You said you had lots of ideas in your own head.
Best if you have ideas, best to not discuss them in kitchens at parties. I've heard some fantastic novels at kitchens and parties, and I've learnt to actually keep my ideas in my head while they're ideas because I'm still having a discussion in my head, and then get them onto paper and then really interrogate them. And, I just think it's important to do that
I think the important thing is that you do still have ideas, which is great, so we can expect more
It's
from
when
her.
you have too many ideas, it's a real problem, yeah. But I'm not getting any younger, so I do want to keep going, if that's the question.
And is the question perhaps, are you going to continue in the same vein, or have you got some other tangent you want to move on to?
Well, I do tend to leapfrog between drama and documentary. I like that. This was a very challenging film to make. Interestingly, I feel more invigorated from this challenge than I did making another challenging thing, which was the Christchurch series, because I came out of that, I think I swallowed too much, I breathed in too much liquefaction dust. Working in the red zone was hugely toxic, and there was a psychological toxicity that flowed out of there after it screened on television, and I just think it took me a while to recover, but I don't feel like that. With this one, I feel invigorated, which is funny because they're physically very demanding. You know, Helen strides. You know, we asked her to walk slowly once and she just looked silly. She just didn't, it was awful. So we said, no, don't worry. But you know, Helen arrives, and if you want to get the shot where she's coming towards the camera, you have to run very fast to get ahead of her, film her going past, and then run very fast to get ahead of her again. And that is actually really demanding. Yes. I feel in the concourse of the UN, this mad woman in a hat racing. They go, oh my God. I'm sure security were well alerted. But then I know that they had a nickname for me after a while, because we did keep coming back. And the security people, they will just look through you and call you ma'am. It doesn't matter how many times you go in and out of there. But the media liaison people, who are the program prevention officers around the UN, they referred to me as the Mad Hatter. And they would, which was sort of I took it as a term of endearment, and they'd say, hey, it's the Kiwi crew. She's not gonna get it.
Right. Yes?
Thank you, Gaylene. That was really an extraordinary film. And in between finishing in the cinema and getting down here, I had like 3 conversations with people about what was in it and how provocative it was. And I just thank you very much. I really appreciate that huge piece of work. And I'm curious, I thought you'd crafted the end fantastically in terms of how you held our disappointment in the audience. It was so deeply disappointing on so many levels. And I'm really curious if Helen at any point shared with you more than she gave you or we saw on camera, and how, you know, her very telling comment about the next generation, if there was more that she shared with you around that.
No, I'll tell you what, I wasn't sitting in rooms with Helen, having dinners with Helen, finding out all sorts of stuff with Helen, and then going and interviewing her. That isn't how it worked. We would manage to get some time with Helen. It'd be scheduled in. We'd have our crew there, and we would go in, and whatever Helen said, we were filming as we walked in the door, and we were filming as we left. So it wasn't like there was any other information. When the day the straw polls were announced, nobody expected it. I was there at the UN on my own, just me and my little camera with a soundie. Fortunately, I had a soundie with me. And Gemma Gracewood, who some of you might know, she was there, and she had to leave the building to breastfeed her baby. because we couldn't get the baby into the UN. Didn't pass security. So she was outside and she had a little D5 camera that could record video. So she covered Nick Harper outside on her little camera. But basically, we were just scurrying along with the entire press corps. And actually Matthew Lee, who spoke to us, I mean, he's a real outsider at the UN. He's been thrown out of the press corps. He's done things to really piss the press corps off. I don't know what they were, but anyway, he has. And so the reason he talked to us is we were all outsiders together. So in a way, we were making the film talking to people who would talk to us. And so that's the civil society lobby groups who are not UN insiders. And we were fortunate to have access to Gerard Van Boom, who I knew from way back. So Gerard knew me and I knew Gerard. And if that hadn't been the case, I don't think we would have even had access to our own ambassador. You know, it's a tough thing, and I've learnt more about things since we've finished the film. Sitting watching the film's really educational. Sitting watching the film with Helen is really educational. But no, there's not extra off screen. What you see is what we got.
I'm of Helen's generation and have been an admirer ever since one of her friends, the Tizards, taught us at university, and have followed her course. And I've also followed New Zealand film. And I came along today with 2 points. How on earth would you make a film about that topic? And I'm just absolutely amazed. You blew me. It's not just a New Zealand film, it's a New Zealand film of high international renown, I would say. It's brilliant. I watched this whole, and you took it from one aspect, which was the woman's role, which has always been my path also. But I watched this whole process. I spent the months that this was going on, watching everything that was on TV, New Zealand TV, international TV, watching all the debates and presentations. And the winner, I picked quite a while before any of the votes came out. He had somehow media presence that some of the others didn't have. That was number one. I think there was a political aspect through this whole thing, which would have been really inappropriate in the film. But the political aspect was the uprising of refugees during the course of time that the voting took place.
Look,
and I remember a distinctive week where it was just atrocious. Then, in my opinion, there was a third aspect. She had New Zealand political support, which put her into the political arena. And you had Russia, France, and the US voting against. John Key and Obama were very close. John Key and China were very close. And I don't think France has ever been a really close friend since the Greenpeace situation. So there were a lot of political things, I think, beyond Helen.
Oh, yeah, and we say that in the film. I mean, Helen says it. You know, and I think, you know, with the UN is geopolitical, and what you say could well be true, but who knows? We don't know, and we've spent a lot of time looking, and everybody's opinion is up for grabs, and the reason is it's secret. So the fact that John Key played golf with Obama is neither here nor there. The USA vetoed us. The fact So, you can only ever look at the results of a thing. And it's not a current affairs film. It's a character-based observational documentary. So what's in there is what we could film. If we couldn't film it, it's not in there. It's not like there's any commentator giving an opinion. So what you see is what you get. And my job as a filmmaker, working closely with my editor, Paul Sartorius, and we have done this before. I mean, he cut getting to our place too. My job as a filmmaker, I think, is to we're not making a television documentary, we're not making a current affairs thing, we're not making an analysis of anything. We're actually making an observational documentary which is funded by and supported by New Zealand investors and the New Zealand Film Commission to go into New Zealand cinemas and to entertain and inform. And that's what... So therefore, the film has to be focused, and I think we're most interested in people. And I mean, I think if anything, what the film says is we're all people. Your opinion is as good as the next guy's opinion. We don't have to have experts. We do have to think for ourselves. And we do have to agree to disagree and get on with changing the things that we think are really important to change. And for me, what I would like to change is the gender-bound world we live in. So this film's a little drop in the bucket for that.
Who's holding a microphone?
Kia ora, Gaylene. Thank you so much for a wonderful film. I have two questions, but I'm going to just, seeing as you've just touched on one of the things that I wanted to ask you. Given that you've been there, and I mean, I found it quite interesting that you had a lot of, in your list of credits, there was acknowledgement of different journalists, but given that you got to see more behind the scenes than they normally do when they go to the UN, is it actually feasible, is it possible to change the UN in such a way within the next 5 to 10 years that we can see a woman Secretary General? Or do you think that we need to have something really radical happen because those veto countries just seem to be such a stumbling block?
Well, can we have a woman leader who gets elected here? Can we have a woman leader who gets elected as president in the United States? It seems not. Can we... But it isn't just about these leaders, is it? It's actually about, can we have a world where, and I think it really comes down to men now. I'm glad for this question because I think there's a sort of a funny feeling that if women have power, then somehow men lose it. And I think that we've had this gender conversation now in the public space since at least 1970. So how long is that? It's actually quite short in human evolution. This is a revolution. That's a revolution from, how things have been for 2,000 years at least. It's kind of probably DNA bound. So it's really great that we're having this conversation. And you would expect a place that's got... the UN is an audacious idea, and one can only be proud of that idea, that the countries of the world can get together to have a place to talk instead of shooting one another. So, that's a real start, the UN. The fact that it doesn't work is a shame, and we need to do something about it. And that's sort of beyond this gender thing. And I think... Now we've had this discussion, we retreated into the women's room, we had fights and arguments and we worked out things and people think this and people think that, and we can all have an argument in the women's room. But I think what I made this film for is consciousness raising for a general audience worldwide and especially here, so that we can understand that if we empower women, men don't lose power. What we have is more power among humanity. We have a stronger human race. And what's wrong with that? You know, it's like you share power and you still have it. So, yeah.
Excellent.
Gaylene, thank you very much for a film that somehow managed to be both depressing and energising at the same time. A real oxymoron. Fantastic. Two quick questions. Do you have any idea why Samantha Power, the American ambassador, was not at the vote? Was that roughly the time that Trump was being made president?
She was there when the last straw poll was done, and the next day was just a rubber stamp. She was there for the vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second question was just really why you chose to launch the film in Sydney.
Well, we had this wonderful invitation from the Sydney Film Festival, and they're over now, so we would have to wait a year to screen My Year with Helen in Sydney, and we have a distributor who owns the film for Sydney, for Australia and New Zealand. And it's always quite a tricky one of how we release our films, because in film terms, in industry terms, in distribution terms, New Zealand and Australia are one territory. So we were very fortunate it's very hard to turn down the opportunity to screen your film, to launch it in the equivalent of the Civic, but in Sydney, and we were able to have Helen with us because she hadn't gone on her trip of a lifetime yet. So that's what we did. Also, I think knowing that the film works across Australia and New Zealand is good to know. And you know, it's great, yeah.
And in fact, it was a great reception.
Oh,
Surprisingly great.
4-minute standing ovation at the end of the film. It was incredible. And a big Q&A at the Sydney Town Hall. So it helps me feel a little bit better and to be able to really enjoy the New Zealand premiere on Sunday. You know, filling the Civic, oh my God, there's nothing like it. It's top of the pops for me. You know, I've never made a film that's filled the Civic. Very few movies do it. That's kind of rock concerts do it. So, you know, and they do it for the opening night of the film festival. But to see everybody turn up, the audience is the main thing with our filmmakers. Without the audience, none of those films, if I hadn't been able to have an ongoing conversation through my films with the New Zealand audience, I would be an ex-filmmaker, and I would have become one round about Mr. Wrong, because we couldn't get it. Between the filmmaker and the audience lies a huge global industry, which is the distribution industry. And if you can't get your films to the audience, it's difficult. So film festivals like this are really great ways for distributors to see how films work, for the exhibitors, more importantly, for the cinemas to pick the film up and to see your film into cinemas. And once you've seen your films into cinemas, you've got this wonderful thing called an audience, and that's you. Without the audience, we're just talking to ourselves on quite an expensive meter.
I wanted to thank you very much for the music and just comment on the music. I thought it was wonderful. It really lent a lot to the movie. Is it your sister?
Yeah, that's my little blister.
Is it? Oh, lovely. Well, please pass on the congratulations to her because she did a wonderful job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Look, I can tell you a little bit about the music because Jan and I didn't work together for a long time because I would always say, look, Jan, the world's full of composers, but I've only got one sister. And if we fall out over a music cue, because, you know, I'm the big sister telling her what to do, we could easily end up in an argument about who said what to who in 1968. And I would rather we didn't work together. But when it came to Home by Christmas, the film about our father's story, we both said, hey, let's risk it. And it worked beautifully. I mean, her music for that film is stunning as well. So when it came to this one, I said to Jan, look, I don't know. It's a documentary. Music and documentaries is a whole thing. But Jan happens to be a bit of an expert on it because she's written a lot of documentary music in Australia. She lives in Australia. So I said, look, the music has to be the whispered conversations that we don't have access to. You know, that building talks. You can actually hear it whispering sometimes. It echoes and it whispers. And so she went round to her little spot round the road in Mount Victoria. She was working in Mount Victoria, and Paul and I would be cutting around the corner in Mount Victoria, and there'd be a knock at the door and Jan, oh, look, I've got this, look, it's just, I've put it on this little USB stick and, oh, okay, it's probably no good and, you know, I don't know why, I don't know where it came from and it's probably hopeless. And what I've done is blah, 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 and by the time she was still telling us, we would have put it in, heard the first couple of things and gone, and it said, it goes there. And we put it in and we go, shh, 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 shh. How about this? Roll the film and go, yes, thanks, that's really good. Go and do us another one. and when she said, and she was doing all that on samples, and when she said she wanted to then spend just about her entire music budget, which she could have just had as a fee, on a really expensive choir to do the real voices, I said, look, you know, you don't need to, it's great. But she insisted, and isn't it great? Yeah,
fabulous.
It adds a huge dimension. It makes the film a movie. And I mean, if you get a chance to listen to that song she wrote for the credits, it's just beautiful. We've got Annie Crummer singing on it, and it's woman in lots of different languages. That's all the words are, is woman in many languages. She's clever, my sister.
So you'll work together again?
Yeah, probably.
Hey, Gaylene, thanks for such a clever and educational film. I hope it travels widely to every country that has women in it. But in a local context, I found the very small piece with Tim Grosser in it, something of a cliffhanger. And I know you said you could get what you could get, but were you not inclined or looking for opportunity to talk to Mr. Grosser again in the film?
Well, what, to explain to us what happened? Well, Mr. Grosser is the New Zealand ambassador to Washington. And Gerard was the New Zealand ambassador, permanent representative at the UN. And we found that actually we could talk to Tim Grosser because Helen was in Washington, so it was part of our story. But we don't cut back to a lot of people for comment. And we filmed a lot around the New Zealand campaign. It doesn't fit in the film. The film kept spitting it out. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just like not what the film is about.
Hi, Gaylene. I was just wondering, because you spoke a lot about Helen's experience as a woman in politics. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit more about your experience as a female director in a historically male-dominated field that is filmmaking.
Well, I think that's a really interesting question because Helen and I both came through our respective areas sort of at the beginning of things. You know, Helen came through the women's movement in the 70s, agitation for more women's participation across the board, political, all the rest. And I was around, and you often find women at the beginning of things. You know, you find women at the beginning of the French Revolution, you find them at the beginning of the Russian Revolution. They're always there at the beginning of things. And as soon as there's money on the table and the whole thing gets a bit more structured, it gets harder for them. So I'm a woman who came in, I arrived in New Zealand in 1977. I was working at Pacific Films. It was clear to see that all these ruffians I drank with down at the pub were making films and they didn't know what they were doing. So it was pretty easy for me to decide that I could do it too. And I was also fortunate to have had a very good gender analysis schooling, which meant when things happened to me along the way where, perhaps my films were less visible than I thought they ought to have been, or when they were maybe overlooked in certain quarters, I could basically have a really good analysis. I had a personal political analysis of what was happening. So I wasn't taking it so personally. And that gives me a lot of resilience. And I think Helen's got a lot of resilience. She got much more. Want to learn about resilience, spend a little while with Helen Clark. I mean, she really does know about resilience in a way that, times 10 me. And I think that's really what we need as women makers. You can't, at the point where you really would like to climb under the duvet and stay there for 6 months and call your film practice because the critics are having a really good chew at it. I mean, Perfect Strangers, my God, if you read now what was said before we even started shooting that film and after it came out, in 4 column inches in the Herald, you wouldn't make another movie. But I have to say I'm really, really grateful to the New Zealand Film Commission and the New Zealand filmmaking community who really stuck by me in that. And, because usually if your film gets dissed like that, you can't possibly make another movie. It's very hard. You can't get the money. You have to wait 10 years for the memory to fade. Because we're really good at remembering what we are, what our failures are. But fortunately, when it came to Perfect Strangers, we had sold it offshore. The Film Commission really stuck with us. And now that film is getting a real resurgence. It's standing as a female genre film with a lot to say about that. So, you just, if you're a filmmaker, just keep doing it. Don't give up.
Is there one more and then we'll wrap it up? Okay. Time-wise.
Time, yes.
Okay.
It's a Tuesday. Haven't you got jobs? Where are you supposed to be?
Thank you for being a very responsive audience. I mean, who wouldn't be responsive to a film like that? But thank you for coming with your questions. And I would like you to, once again, show your appreciation for our wonderful grande dame. And we'll see you at her next one, whatever it might be.
Hopefully. You never know. Every time I make a film, I think it's my last, and I've done that since 1978.
The Talk series is proudly supported by the New Zealand Film Commission, Foundation North, Images and Sound, and White Studios. Music for the podcast was provided by Poddington Bear, and voiceover is Lucy Wigmore.